Okay. Well, great. Welcome back to another Harvest Development Group's Do Good Better uh, live stream discussions. Today, we're very fortunate to be with a firm that I've worked with in the past and really respect, Jitasa, a financial management group based out of Boise, Idaho. And today, we're with Don Needs and Jon Osterburg, who are going to tell us a little bit about some funding streams and the PPP and other types of funding that's available and how we can, all of us in the nonprofit world can take advantage of those. So welcome.
Awesome. Thanks. Glad
Great.
to
Thanks
be
for
here.
having us.
Sure. So I don't know who wants to start, but this is definitely a topic that is really, on the top of all of our nonprofit partners' minds when we do surveys. Funding is the number one concern during the COVID-19 crisis. So we're really interested to hear how you can help us either get that funding, convert it into a grant, or other types of funding concepts. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I don't know who wants to start. John, did you want to
Yeah.
start? Okay,
Don,
great.
you just want to give yourself a quick introduction and then I'll introduce myself and start our presentation.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Scott. I'm Don Nees, Vice President of Finance at Jitasa. I've been with the organization for 7+ years, and really we've gotten the Paycheck Protection Program. John and I are heading this out to facilitate and assist our nonprofit clients with applying for a lot of this assistance. And then also even nonprofits around the world who are not Jitasa clients, also we are assisting in this process. So we've really dug in to really educate ourselves around all the possibilities for nonprofits out there, and really trying to give everybody as much resources as they can and help everybody through this process, because it's a new thing that's been rolled out very fast, and a lot of people have been left in the dark from getting these Paycheck Protection Program loans. So we've been really trying to provide some transparency, and we have a couple of partners that we've partnered with from a lending perspective. They've been able to get a lot of a lot of nonprofits throughout the world just funded with these loans. So
Awesome. Thanks, Don. And Jon Osterburg, Vice President of Sales and Marketing. And it feels weird saying that because I feel like now everybody usually thinks I'm not going to sell you something now, but the reality is I've just actually been our executive sponsor on this task force that's been allocated to the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. So I've been with Jitasa for 10 years. For my first 6 years, I also worked on the accounting side of things, serving our clients, most notably about 50 of the Boy Scouts of America chapters around the country. And so have my feet in both sides of the fire, so to say. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here.
Great.
Confirm that you can see a presentation here.
We can see it. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so just as a slight introduction, we have been hosting webinars, actually, Scott, every week for the last 4 weeks on Fridays. And we've been hosting open town hall sessions, more of a forum for folks to just come and they can either raise their hand in Zoom calls or they can type comments in the Q&A section. But essentially, we've been available twice a week for the last 4 weeks to cover the updates on the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loans, as well as to approach individual and unique organizational issues that are coming up. So some examples would be, if you furloughed employees, what do you need to do now that you've received your funding? Or if you're paying somebody over $100,000, what does that mean? So really just being available to answer individual questions for organizations, because the reality is we tried to wrap the Paycheck Protection Program around 40 million organizations, and that's just really hard to do because everybody has their own unique situation. So a little bit about Jitasa's role in this process. So it's kind of a funny time. I never thought that because of a pandemic that accountants might have the opportunity to be quote unquote the heroes of the day, but we feel like it's kind of our place right now to stand up and really be there for both our clients and the nonprofit sector, and ensuring that they can access funding and stay solvent and hopefully even healthy through this time. So we've really been a backbone of information, providing information, stripping away the information that doesn't pertain to the nonprofit sector from the CARES Act, and then being prepared to apply that knowledge and information to each unique situation and scenario. Something else that's been really unique is we've been able to talk to our clients in a way that we haven't in the past as a group. This is one of the first times that a significant percentage of our clients have been going through the same thing at the same time. And so because of that, through each one of their individual experiences, we're able to share those experiences with our other clients and with the greater nonprofit sector.
Hey, John, just so people can understand the scope of your work, how many clients do you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with a little over 550 nonprofit organizations around the country in 45 states. And we, through this process, have probably worked with another 150 nonprofits that are not Jitasa clients. Pretty interestingly, yesterday we took a poll during, and I'll actually bring it up at the very end, but it was interesting to see. It was a great example of how the community was able to utilize each individual experience to help people feel either comfort or discomfort in their application process with big and small banks. And I'll show that data at the very end, but it was more startling than I would have guessed. So the other thing we've been doing is we've been helping folks understand eligibility. Initially, there was a lot of confusion around this because these loan programs are historic. They've been there before coronavirus and the CARES Act. And so you had to start to understand how those eligibility requirements had changed. There was also some information that was out there around 1099s initially that was confusing. So really just helping people kind of work through the understanding of eligibility. And also we basically started a one-on-one task force. What we realized was everybody has their own unique scenario, and they also are approaching us at their own position in their journey of understanding the Paycheck Protection Program and the economic injury disaster loans. And for us, it was a lot easier actually to work with people one-on-one than it was to have these big group discussions, at least initially. Those have started to slowly fade away, and the group discussions have started to work in a better way just because everybody's kind of caught up to the same position. But it's still been very beneficial to be able to have discussions about individual employees and what that means for an organization applying for the program. And then lastly, I think what's really unique, Don and I don't know anybody else that's been able to do this. We just happened to have an investor that was a commercial lender, and they had access to Paycheck Protection Program funding, or at least had access to apply for the funding through the SBA. As you would assume, a commercial lender during a natural disaster, like a hurricane or a tornado, would need to be able to lend small businesses money in order to operate during that period of time. So we were actually able to work with that vendor specifically to support nonprofit organizations. I'll let Don get more into the details about how our relationship with them works, but it's really unique because we've been able to fulfill a gap that lenders have had in this process.
Great.
So one thing that stands out to us is just the significance of the timeline. Our CEO yesterday on our town hall said that the SBA processed more loans in 14 days than they had in the previous 14 years. So if we think about this timeline, it's extremely compressed at this point. So 3 weeks ago, the only program available to apply for was the economic injury disaster loan. Maybe this is about 3.5 weeks ago now. But 2.5 weeks ago, the CARES Act passed while we were hosting our webinar on Friday. And so everybody was quickly trying to understand what the loan application was and what these two different calculations were and what was included or not included in the calculations. And so a week and a half ago, we were spending a lot of time really defining the loan application or maximum loan application amount. And this last week, folks started receiving funding. And so we've now pivoted to really helping folks understand the loan forgiveness calculations. And this week, quite frankly, most folks that are urgently speaking with us are trying to figure out how to access the funding from the second round of funding that's going to be coming out for the Paycheck Protection Program. Because there are a lot of people, it seems like about 50-50. Folks are on either one side of the line or the other, having either received funding or not received funding. So part of the confusion over the last 3 weeks and why this has been pretty, quite a crazy time, quite frankly. I imagine it as this big game of telephone is kind of a comedic way for me to think about it. But you have the CARES Act, which is a massive document, and you've got the SBA and other government organizations trying to understand and define what the CARES Act has already written. Then you've got banks and lenders trying to understand what was produced by the SBA and other government agencies. And then you've got accountants trying to understand these applications that the banks and lenders are putting out. And so you've got this fun game of telephone, literal telephone happening, except for it's all through the internet and documents. And there's thousands and thousands of pages with slightly different tidbits of information. And we read things different ways and we see things different ways. So it's been a lot and it's been confusing. And so, I'm happy to say that Don has been a workhorse in the sense that he actually goes to the original source documents and reads them straight out of the CARES Act so that we can make our own direct interpretation on what's required. But then you got to wrap all this up and know that the CARES Act was written for over 40 million different entities. And so they're different types too. They're small businesses, they're sole proprietors, independent contractors, nonprofit organizations. So you got to remember that this document was created for a bunch of different entities, and we're just trying to all work within the confines of the document. And so because of that, it's going to be confusing and it's going to be chaotic, but that's okay. Everybody's working to try to move forward and do it in the best way possible. So at this point, we're feeling pretty comfortable with the loan calculation amount. So, and just so everybody knows, there's two sides, right? There's a maximum loan calculation that you can make, and then there's a loan forgiveness, what we currently believe will be forgiven as a grant during this process. And so that forgiveness calculation still has some more detailed definition that's going to be required in order for us to be 100% certain we know what's going to happen there. But I think, Don, we would say we're 80% comfortable at this point, maybe 90% comfortable at this point, that we have an understanding of how it's going to operate. All right, Don, I'll turn it over to you from here and we can go forward into the loan forgiveness a little bit.
Great, yeah. So John alluded to it is the entire system has done a lot of work in the last 2-3 weeks, and just from the interpretation of the guidelines to the setup of banks and lending systems to how documents are going to be collected, reported on, and verified and attested to. There's been a lot of work behind the scenes, and it's kind of been a fluid situation. And I think just acknowledging the volume and the velocity to which this has rolled out, just keeping that in perspective, that I think overall things have gone as well as they could have, because it's a massive undertaking of what has been presented to not only, from the CARES Act to the SBA, to the lenders, to accountants. It's just a big undertaking. So all of what we have today, as John mentioned, is really our best understanding of the rules and guidelines. Really specifically, the forgiveness piece is a piece that really needs further defined by the SBA. They've done some great clarifications on the loan amounts, and I think that's solid guidance. I think everybody kind of knows what that loan amount is and how it's calculated. A perfect example is there was a $100,000 threshold that was excluded from the loan amount calculation. And from the CARES Act, it didn't really define, are we just talking about salaries, or are we including benefits in that amount? And so those are clarification things that, as they're going through these acts and passing them, it's hard to define every single little piece. But naturally, as accountants, we are basically like, well, are benefits included or are they not? Luckily, the SBA had come out, a couple of weeks later and defined those items. We expect a similar process to go through with the forgiveness piece, because there are a few triggers and levers that are kind of unclear on exactly what they mean. So our really guidance for anybody who's really looking at the forgiveness piece of things is just to be conscious that everything is not 100% defined yet. And that's okay. I think you can plan for scenarios. You can kind of get an idea of what the intent of the forgiveness is. But there are a lot of questions around, can we prepay expenses, and are they actually going to be forgiven if we prepay rent? There's nothing that really says, everybody can interpret what's written a different way. So we are waiting for further guidance on that. John, if you'll go ahead and do the next slide. So this is really an update from our most recent webinars as far as the Paycheck Protection Program funding limit has been reached from the prior amount, and it's been maxed out. Which is that's the unfortunate news, and they're no longer taking applications. We get a lot of folks who are kind of in limbo, specifically with larger banks, is they say, I don't know where we're at in the process. If you have received what's called an SBA loan number, then your loan is secured and you are going to get funded. That funding may not have reached your bank account yet. They technically have 10 days from that SBA loan number to fund your bank account. I will tell you from our interaction and our work with A10 Capital, it's everybody's relying upon horsepower and manpower to get all this information in, because the system was rolled out so quickly that it's not the most efficient or automated. So I know if you received an SBA loan number and you have not received your funds in your bank account, just know that it's coming. A lot of these banks are just trying to manually type in all of the wire information, the bank information, and get those processed. If you have not received an SBA loan number, then your kind of next question is what's next? What am I supposed to do? So there's obviously been some great news about recharging the Paycheck Protection Program funding. So another $310 billion in funding is expected to be added, I believe, by the end of the week. So our focus is kind of moving to the folks who have not received funding. How can you prepare today to make sure that you get these loans secured for your organization? So basically is what you'll see a lot of the organizations out there doing, and A10 Capital, who we're partnered with, is doing this also, is there really is what you can do is collect all of your relevant documentation to support your payroll costs, complete the application that you have that's available from your bank and lender, and then we're really going to stage the application so that everything is signed. People are still signing, whether it be physically or DocuSign or e-sign. They're still signing Paycheck Protection Program loan applications, with the acknowledgement that these aren't going to be pushed through to the SBA portal yet. But ideally, once that portal opens, everything is staged to where everything get pushed through. We have heard indications that banks like Chase have something upwards towards of 40 billion of applications already staged. I know A10 Capital has quite a bit of applications staged also. So, excuse me. We get a lot of people who say, should we utilize Jitasa A10 Capital instead of your own bank? Our recommendation is, if you're in the process and you're confident that you have great communication with your bank, then you're probably safe to stay where you're at, because a lot of banks are probably doing exactly the same thing as A10 Capital, as Chase, as everybody else. I'll walk into a little bit of the back end of how the process looks probably for every bank. Is basically the organization will submit their Paycheck Protection Program application. Typically some sort of supporting documents are requested. Somebody on the bank's end is going through and verifying these documents, primarily around payroll reporting and payroll costs. The applications that's submitted in the SBA portal, and the SBA loan number is received. One of the unique things that we've done, the Jitasa A10 Capital process has streamlined a little bit, is the application still submitted. It's still submitted to the SBA portal. It's still a SBA loan number is still received. But is what Jitasa's done is actually in parallel, while folks are filling out their Paycheck Protection Program application, we are actually creating the documentation and verifying it and attesting to it in parallel with that. So it's nice because number one, we're probably a little bit more efficient at understanding payroll documentation than A10 Capital. We're accountants, we're used to seeing that every day. For our clients out there, we know exactly where all this information's at. We have all of it already. So it's been a really nice process that instead of being a sequential application submitted and then it has to wait to get verified, really an application, once it's submitted to A10, all the documentation has already been verified by Jitasa, so it pushes through pretty quick, which is nice. So it's been a really nice synergy between our two organizations. We have been we have shown that have been faster and more efficient. To give a few perspective, we had some folks who were trying to apply through Chase, and they sat in their queue for about a week. They came to Jitasa, and within 3 days, they had their PPP funding. So we did have a good relationship there. And the nice part is we have full insight into the process. So you know, we get lots of clients and non-clients who say, I just want to check on the status of my loan, and we're able to respond to that, you know, easily within a day. So really understanding where you're at in the process is that's probably, some people are still left in the dark today. They just don't know where they're at. And the key question is, have you received an SBA loan number? If yes, you're going to be funded. We're confident of that. People are just working through paperwork, the banks are. No, you must wait for additional funds to be added to the Paycheck Protection Program, which it is very likely that is going to occur by the end of the week. So that's nice to know. One of the really common questions we get is, I don't know where I'm at in the process. What if I submit 2 applications? And is there a penalty in that? Although I would not recommend it, you know, first step would always be reach out to your bank and try to understand where you're at in the process. If your bank, but we have had organizations who can't get a response. We have had organizations go and submit through A10 Capital or a different local lender, and basically they will receive an SBA loan number from one application. When the second one is submitted, the SBA system just rejects it because it recognizes the EIN number and that they've already received a loan. So I know there's been conflicting information and some people are left in limbo, and it's hard to know where you're at in the process. So I think that is a possibility. If you feel like you're not getting anywhere with your current bank, just notify them, say, hey, I want to withdraw my application, and you can submit it somewhere else. And we don't anticipate there's a hang up. We've had a few folks go through who've applied 2 places, and the second application just doesn't get approved. The first one does.
Good to know. Great.
Yeah, and how to contact Jitasa for future Paycheck Protection Program funding. So John and his task force team have a page set up here. We also have a link to apply at A10 Capital. Again, the benefit of kind of working with our pro bono task force is that we are verifying all this stuff kind of in parallel as everything goes through. So A10 Capital gets it and it gets passed right on through. They don't have to spend time with their staff trying to go through this stuff. A few other, go ahead and next slide, John. Thank you. I've received my PPP loans. So now what? Number one is start understanding your forgiveness. This presentation we have today hasn't been as focused on forgiveness. We did a webinar a couple weeks ago on how we interpret forgiveness. We will do another one as things get further clarified, but I think the guidelines are close enough to start estimating forgiveness. And we've created a forgiveness calculator based on our assumptions that you can kind of go in and plug in everything and see the rough amount that you expect to be forgiven. Biggest piece with forgiveness is make sure you're spending over 75% of the loan amount on payroll costs, you know, to make sure that's forgiven. The second question we get is, you know, you don't want to lose sight that you want to have a strategy around your funding. So just because something is going to be forgiven does not mean that you need to spend all the money or blow all the money, or there's an economic piece behind things that needs to make sense for your organization. So if it makes sense to hire more staff to achieve more forgiveness for the loan, great. If it doesn't, if you're uncertain about funding and maybe, you know, it makes more sense to conserve some cash, maybe it's not forgiven, but it could give you some cash reserves to make it through maybe some tough times if you can't have special events or something like that. So just know that just because something is going to be forgiven, don't assume that the best route is always just to spend all of it. You have to understand your business needs, and the funding is that turns into a loan is relatively cheap, right? 1% interest rate. So it's about the cheapest you're going to get. You're allowed to prepay back any amounts that you want. So if you make it through this time and you say, hey, it's great, I reserved a $20,000 loan just to make sure I got through these 6 months, but things turned around, I don't need any more, great. You can prepay that back. There's no prepayment penalty with that. So the second thing, once you've received your PPP funds, is really ensure you have proper documentation in place. So number one, accurate payroll reporting. Number two is accurate bookkeeping and records. We, in the nonprofit arena, we don't anticipate a ton of extra tracking that's going to be involved. We anticipate they're really going to be looking at payroll reports and then really your just bookkeeping records. So kind of general ledger detail on what did you pay for rent, if that's what you're including. I don't anticipate that they're going to ask for every single invoice and stuff like that. They could. I'm not sure that there's the manpower to really verify all that. And also, there's really no need to go create a separate single bank account. We get that question a lot, just to you know, a single bank account for these PPP funds. Nonprofits, a lot of them are used to fund accounting anyway, so there are ways to structure your accounting system to make sure that you can accurately record what's being spent where. So as we get further clarification on forgiveness and items like that, they will also provide further guidance on really the exact documentation they're going to be looking for. But I anticipate it's going to be very similar to the loan amount process, and that they're really going to be looking at payroll reports with a primary focus at looking at kind of the gross wages that were paid out. That was kind of the big, you were required to submit health benefit stuff and items like that, but I'd say the primary focus of really the document verification was really looking at those gross wage amounts that were paid.
Great.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Well, Scott, that brings us to the end of at least the presentation or the slides that we had cherry picked for today. Were there any items that stood out to you that would be worth having a deeper discussion on?
Look, I think you guys did a great job. Very clear. I love it. But quick question. So how long do you feel that Jitasa will be able to carry on this pro bono work of just working with people who aren't your client? Will you be able to go into the summer, or is it maybe a defined period?
Well, I think my best guess on how long the $310 billion of new stimulus funding is going to last is about 2 days. So our pro bono task force will probably be done with its work at that point in time. No, we'll continue to be available for this one-on-one task force work through the summer. I can tell you already that the volume of calls that we have been getting has substantially decreased as there has been further clarifications on what all of this means. Folks have become more comfortable with what this means for them. And so there's just, quite frankly, fewer questions out there at this point. So our town halls are scheduled for the next 8 weeks.
Okay.
So we'll be available for at least that long. And then depending on the need at that point in time, we'll continue to be available.
Right. And can we invite you back once they define the forgiveness piece a little bit better? Can we invite you back to help us understand that, unravel that?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be happy to help. That's what we're here for. Again, it's a unique time in the world where a pandemic creates a world where accountants are really important. So
Yeah.
It's strange times, but we're happy to be able to step up to the plate.
Great. I just want to say to anyone in the audience, if you've got any questions, you can feel free to go through the discussion chat on either Facebook or our website, and we can get the questions directly to Jitasa, or you can directly through this website at www.jitasagroup.com/relief. And yeah, I mean, this was great. I think any type of assistance to help our nonprofits through this process is very well needed and appreciated. I really want to thank you all at Jitasa. Again, I worked with this group on financial management for a nonprofit that I ran, and they are excellent. So I can't recommend them enough for the work that they do. Thank you very much for being on the call with us today, and we wish everyone well. Take care.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, great. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.